Thank you so much, Sue. And thank you everyone for being here. It's a very bizarre experience to see many Nicoles in the room, but it's a very wonderful experience to see many faces and people in the room for this conversation. I'm really excited to be here with Nilou. Nilou and I have been doing this work and known each other for a number of years now, first through some immigrant solidarity organizing that Nilou was core to and leading through her organization, Pangea Legal Services, which we're going to hear a lot more about in Oakland. Continuing through the nonprofit organizations that are trying to build liberatory structures. And I remember when Nilou was just starting on writing this book, on thinking about this book, on dedicating some time toward it. And I'm so glad that it's here. I'm so glad that we get to be in conversation with you about it. The book, The Future is Collective, Effective Workplace Strategies for Building a Culture of Care, is a beautiful collection of personal and organizational stories about how to really build organizations that can do meaningful liberatory work and take care of the people in those organizations. There's a link in the chat to buy the book if you haven't already. Check it out. Check it out from your local library. Ask your local bookstores to carry it. We want many people to see this book and to hear about the great wisdom that's included. And just for a little flow for today, we have a number of questions for Nilou, and we also want to make space for some questions for you all. Our time is going to fly. We only have an hour together. So if you do have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Our colleague Hasmeek will be collecting them, and we'll make some space at the end to invite a few folks off of mute to share their questions directly with Nilou, so you'll get a chance to engage as well. And I just wanted to start with maybe a softball, but also a really core and important question. The title of your book is The Future is Collective. Why? Why do you believe that? Why is collective governance so crucial? And especially to meeting this political moment right now.
Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having me, Nicole. Thank you, Sustainable Economies Law Center and the Nonprofit Democracy Network. Thanks to the team that put this together. I really appreciate you, and I'm grateful to be here. To why do I think the future is collective? I have seen, and I think we both have seen through the Nonprofit Democracy Network and in our relationships with clients, community organizations, so many hundreds and hundreds of groups that we have access to, and that not even like, on a national scale, it's many more, are, and on a global scale, even broader, there's so many groups that are underway to being more intentional and participatory in the way that they govern and lead themselves, our movements. We're seeing so much, like so many beautiful like movement leaders and organizing happening right now. And our movements, our nonprofits, the social justice spaces that we're in, I think the groups that used to replicate these like very strict hierarchies, these unintentional ways of being very top down, are I'm seeing hundreds and hundreds of orgs that are getting more participatory and collective. And there are, I think there are just going to be more emerging, groups from organizing in collectivist spaces. And as people build these practices and tools and ways, I also, I'm seeing, and I think we're going to continue seeing, like those individuals from our spaces start taking office on a and shifting the ways that local governments are run. And then, long term, I do see the future really being collective on a state and federal level also. So that's kind of how I envision the future becoming collective. And I think we're kind of witnessing it every day right now. It's really crucial in this moment because we're at a crisis point. There's so many crisis points, and it's also the biggest opportunity point for growth and building. And our movements really need sustained organizing and showing up. I'm curious, from the folks that are here, if you want to engage on the screen or in the chat, uh, how many of you all have ever been a part of a movement or a nonprofit or organizing space where either people were talking and talking and talking and making sure everyone was heard and things weren't really moving forward, or um, there was like some conversation and things moved forward, but the loudest voices in the room moved the thing forward? Can folks engage in the chat? Or, oh, I'm seeing some emojis. Oh, yes, lots of thumbs up. Yes, that's nice. Um, yeah, many thumbs up from the 42 folks here in the room. So those two scenarios are super common, especially in really well-intentioned collective spaces. And so, it's like extra important right now in this moment to break away from that. We have this huge monster to defeat, and um, we need this, we need our foundation and our alternative to be really strong and effective. And there are other ways. There are many organizations that are being effective and doing it in different ways. And so many of us lack that experience or that access. And that's the hope that I have for this book, that it offers some access and some stories that are really concrete and practical. There are over like 50 pages of appendices in the book that have some samples and tools and from different organizations or different practices. And um, yeah, I have to say, it was a real gift to be able to dwell on what works well for organizations for over 4 years while I wrote the book, and interview really highly effective organizations across the country um, to be able to share in this. And I hope that the Future is Collective meets some of the needs our organizations and movements, especially in this moment of crisis and opportunity, that it meets some of the needs that we have.
Hmm. Thanks, Nilou. Thanks for bringing that beautiful vision of a collective future into this moment. Feels important to hold in the midst of so much authoritarianism that we are confronting as movements right now. And I want to invite you to share maybe some of the more personal or vulnerable stories that you so graciously offer in the book about your own personal growth journey and what it took to become someone who could share leadership really effectively, who could cede control over, projects that you had maybe initiated or work that you that felt really core to your identity and to your sense of purpose, so that it could become a generative collective space in your workplace. And speaking to that experience that I think a lot of people in the room heard about, having the loudest voices in the room often influencing the space. Like, what was your personal journey like to become someone who could really support a collective organization like Pangea?
Uh, it was very bumpy. I'll say that. My personal journey was bumpy, and yes, I do reference the bumps in the book. It was challenging. There was a lot of ego unpacking that had to happen throughout, and a lot of inward turning inward. And I have to say, like, it didn't just happen because I suddenly like saw the light and turned inward, but it was like my colleagues. I was supported. I was really supported by my community and my organization. And so, for those aren't familiar with Pangea, the organization Pangea Legal Services is an immigrant justice organization that I co-founded back in 2012, and I started out as a founding executive director, and we we were 1.5 full-time staff at the time, and we were 21 when I transitioned out. And when I started, I was the ED, and when I left, I was one of 21 co-directors. We had equal salaries, and we we didn't at first manage and collectively share a lot of responsibilities. I held a lot as ED. But when I mean, there's so many stories and bumps to get to even to this part, but when we started um, looking at um, distributed decision making, um, we um, we had, we had a lot of different uh, well, there are two parts, two things I want to share here. There was one piece that, that involved like collective sharing and planning sessions. And in one of our planning sessions, to move into collective decision making, um, two of my colleagues were tasked with interviewing other organizations that were collectively led or that made decisions and had collective practices. And they came back and they shared back their findings, and we were considering together, how are we going to do consensus, are we going to do consensus, consent based, or what, we learned, SELC, for example, has circles and does consent based decision making. Other organizations, some political organizations that we interviewed, to have like just, simple majority, 51% decision making processes. We decided to move, we wanted consensus. Um, and then we realized really quickly, actually, no, we want modified consensus. We can't have everybody, disagreeing all the time. And this initially, we wanted lots of decisions to be made in large groups. We moved towards like making decisions in smaller groups. But even as we did that, and as we moved into, like having an ED structure to having 8 circles or 8 hubs that were like decision making committees, um, I kept defaulting to the old ways of decision making, to my old ways, what I was used to. And, I kept moving things forward, sending emails, doing what I thought was efficient and effective. And my colleagues reminded me, my colleagues helped. And it hurt, sometimes it hurt and it was frustrating, but I would get emails being like, hey, Nilou, actually, you can't make that decision. You need to go through the finance hub first. And then you need to coordinate with the other hub, FYI. I kept getting these reminders and, was held with some gentleness and patience. And so I was lucky to have that gift and support. I also, I think it was like a little bit later after that time that I also, or around that time, I had started my own therapy. And in therapy, I was starting to unpack like the feelings that were coming up, and the way that I was being stripped of power in a way, but also empowered to, to work in this way with in this more participatory way, in this new way that was deconstructing these systems that I didn't actually believe in. And so I think the journey was bumpy. I had to get reminders. I needed the patience, and I had to unpack this urgency, like need, this set feeling for like, oh, things need to get done fast. And a lot of times, leaders, many of us, many of you all in the room, we're used to moving quickly, and we rise to the top by moving quickly, by doing a lot, and that. Um, that I also had to learn, unlearn. And more, one of my colleagues, Bianca, she really frequently like sat me down and was like, Nilou, like, this is not really urgent. And I would like, when I thought about it, I would be like, yeah, this is not really that urgent. A lot of things were not. And that, that kind of, I'll close that thought with, and this question with, the quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, who says, we have to move at the speed of trust. And that is an ongoing learning for me and for a lot of my clients that I work with now.
Mm. I always appreciate hearing you, Nilou, honestly share some of these stories because so many organizations we work with are working in situations where leadership is really like expresses a verbal desire to be more distributed, but is really struggling with the actual practical transition. And I think it's helpful to hold our humanity in that process and to recognize it takes time to change. We need support from each other. A lot of times we need to do our own personal work to support that growth, and that in itself is also can be held collectively. And we don't have. I don't think we have enough stories of people coming forward and sharing the own work that they did in their journey. So I really admire your honesty for putting it out there and for holding yourself with a lot of kindness in your transition. And I also wanted to pick up on the urgency question a little bit, because Pangea was founded at another time in which immigrants were under major attack in this country, and your work is very urgent for many of your clients. There is, deadlines and court cases and high need and you reference throughout the book some of the tensions like around growth and scale. I think one time you told a story of you had the opportunity to get a lot of money that would have included hiring really quickly, and you had to check in as a group and see if you could really handle growing at that pace while maintaining the structures that you had built as an organization. Um, and so, we're in another I feel real crisis moment in our movements. And I wonder if you could just share a little bit more about what you learned at Pangea about navigating the tensions of what can be the real urgency of politically demanding times while building an organization that's committed to like long haul transformation and the different paces at which those processes can move.
Oh, I mean, that you touch on the hardest challenge. That's just there's never like there's no quick answer, and like there's no here's how you find balance at all. Um, but I think there is something um to just recognizing that sometimes we're more strong in like building that internal culture and care. And sometimes we're emphasized a little bit more like the political organizing and the community, like lifting up the community voices. And sometimes we just like focus on filing those legal claims and, or, different parts. And I think there's just no sweet spot. We're always looking for it. And I think that's also the nature of the system we're in and of nonprofit work, where we're paid a fraction of the salaries of a government worker, or of what a living wage might be, and or what a thriving wage might be, and we're doing double, quadruple the work of our government's job, and our what is our collective government, or our collective, what is like a public service job, um, and or stewarding our communities. And the yeah, I think we have to acknowledge like the external tensions and pressures that are there. And then um, I'll say that being collectivized and having some even dedicating time in moments of crisis, or in the midst of these kinds of tensions, which um, Pangea, my former organization, did. Like we did do that. We hit like an internal crisis point, which led us to just slow down and be like, okay, like we're doing all this external stuff, but we're going to make some space for this. And I think that having these internal, like dedicating resources and time to our internal work and our community, the workers that we are and the people that we spend most of our days, the waking hours with, and having really clear roles, decision-making processes, structures, and values alignment agreements, having that, dedicating the time and regularly like nourishing that, feeding that, caring for that, reduces a lot of conflict. It equips us to deal with conflict when it comes really well, because everywhere we have conflict, and every group, two or more. And it allows for so much more alignment, and we can pivot quickly and like at Pangea, what we wanted modified consensus, and we like modified our decision making process multiple times, iterated on it because we wanted enthusiastic support for certain big things. And we wanted to have, we built in structures and systems so that now, my colleagues report times are rough, but at least inside, the way that people are communicating, making decisions, we're not burning out on the inside with internal tensions and fires on top of putting out fires on the outside.
Mm.
So that's how I think really collectivizing and dedicating intentionality to our organization really can support us in navigating these big tensions on the outside.
Mm. Thanks for sharing that. When you said we're not burning out with fires internally while putting out fires externally, there I just got chills, hearing that. So important to create sustainable roles for ourselves in this long haul work. I just wanted to pause and also a reminder for folks as you're hearing Nilou, if you have questions that you would love to ask, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on them and bringing them into the conversation. Um, and thanks also, Nilou, for naming the truth that it's really not a destination. You don't get an organizational structure that works perfectly and then stick with it. It's a constant iterative journey. You're always um, navigating tensions, trying out new structures, and you've referenced some of them a little bit here, but I wonder if you could share a little more details. In the book, you say there really is no one size fits all for organizations, and Pangea went through many different structures and changes over time as you grew. So could you like paint that arc for us and tell us a little bit about some of the different structures you went through, how you changed, and what those changes were in response to?
Yeah, we did go through multiple structures and changes, and I think, just as there is no one size fits all for uh like a lot of different organizations and spaces, there's also no one size fits all within the organization at different stages of the organization. As we grew, our needs grew, and our decision making structures needed to adjust. Like one of the things I reference in the book is, you can't have everyone deciding when you're a group of like, 20 on all the little things. You have to, make your groups a little bit smaller, and like, self-managing teams of 10 to 12 are like a nice number to have, or, you need to adapt to the size and then to the quality and gifts that people bring to the organization. And so that also adapts. There's no one size fits all. Yeah, with us, we started as uh, structurally, our leadership wise, one executive director. We moved to two executive directors a few years later, prior to my going on parental leave. And in that conversation, we actually considered removing all like executive titles, namely just one, mine. And um, it was um, that was kind of the beginning of a personal journey for me, but also, on a larger scale for the organization. Because a few years later, after we developed well, so we moved to two executive directors, but decisions and other the things, practices were still pretty much the same. We had equal salaries, but there were really a few people who made a lot of like administrative financial decisions that impacted the whole organization. And I mentioned, we hit a internal crisis point, and that was the result of a theme that I hear that's kind of like under the subtext of the future is collective of throughout the book, which is people just want to be heard and seen and understood, especially in a social justice organization, especially when you're doing, work that means something to you, especially when you come into a place where you care about your colleagues and each other, and people want to have a say, both in the work and the direction and some of the internal stuff. And sometimes, people say, "Oh, I don't want to I like this is beyond my pay grade, or like I don't want to be involved in that. I don't want your job. Um, but they say that until they don't like a decision that's made, and then they care. And so and I think most of the time, and what I'm seeing a lot of in the larger context, and with a lot of especially nonprofits these days, is um, workers are starting to organize and engage in collective bargaining agreements, unionize, and this is all including in organizations that have decent pay, competitive pay, including in organizations that have flexible like schedules or remote and like decent benefits. But the bottom line still is people want to have more of a say. And that's what happened. That's what happened at Pangea. People wanted more say, and I was like, confused and defensive, and didn't take it in well at first. Needed some help and got support from a wonderful consultant, Kieran Nigam, and moved to first engaged in like a restorative conversation, a healing process in relationship wise, and then we moved into like a structural process, which was um, decentralizing decision making, and being intentional about who makes decisions. First, we looked at, okay, who's making decisions on these big areas, big categories, top three, power heavy decision areas: budget, including salaries, biggest part of the budget in any organization, hiring and firing. We looked at, okay, who's making these decisions? Oh, Nilou's in all of those, and and a few others, but not everyone. Where's everybody else? And we realized, oh gosh, this is just unintentionally happening despite good intentions. Um, and then we moved to creating eight leadership committees, essentially circles, hubs. We called them hubs. We wanted to call them kaleidoscopes, but then we were like, oh, how do we type that every time? Everyone's gonna have to learn the spelling and everything. We landed on hubs for ease, and the eight hubs were essentially decision-making committees that held different areas of the organization, including the money pieces, including HR, including governance, including some of our programmatic work, and everyone in the organization had to be a member of at least one hub. And one of the ways that one of the principles of the hubs was we need one person, at least one person on each hub that has institutional knowledge, some expertise, and at least one person who is like interested and has capacity and wants to like learn and is maybe newer to the thing, so that we create this duplicity, redundancy intentionally, and like long-term sustainability and long-term efficiencies. And so we developed that structure, and um, the the process evolved. And at first we wanted to. There was because of the like broken trust, and the what I had created, and the repair needs. There was a desire to to bring a lot of decisions to the full team. And then one of the iterations over time was, oh my God, we have decision fatigue. And so we were like, okay, actually, let's like take more decisions into the hubs, into these smaller committees, like groups of 3 to 5 or 2 to 5 people. And slowly that evolved, and the structure and decision-making processes and the title, my title being moving from ED to co-ED to co-director with 21, all of us, by the time I transitioned was very much an iterative process. And we made space intentionally to allow ourselves to evolve and shift and make those changes.
Thanks for, painting that picture for us a little more concretely. And we're getting some really wonderful questions here in the chat. Um, Sarah, are you here, and would you be up for coming off mute and asking your question of Nilou? It's a great question and one that we actually, very similar to one that we had invited Nilou to speak on.
Yeah, it was so great to be here, and thank you all for organizing it, and thank you, Nilou, for your time. I'm just getting some steps in over the lunch break, so I'm a little out of breath, but I can absolutely ask my question. I'm just curious, in your research and in your work, talking with folks who are striving towards more of these collectivist leadership models, what the role of culture and ancestral wisdom, especially for folks coming from global majority lineages and non-Western lineages, like what role you have seen that potentially playing, or how that's coming up in the conversation.
Mm, thank you for that question. Nicole, would you like me to answer them one by one, or do you want to collect more questions and then I'll answer them together?
Good question. Yeah, let's take a few since our time is limited. Thanks, Sarah, for that question. And um, I see two other great questions, so maybe we'll take those three and then give you a chance to respond. Janelle, are you up for asking your question?
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Hi, Nilou. I was wondering, as you were going around talking to different organizations, did you encounter any organizations that used to be fairly conventionally hierarchical that managed to shift to collective governance, and what helped make that possible?
Great. Thank you, Janelle. Good to see you.
Such a juicy one. That's great. And then our last question I see in the chat from Jaisha. Are you here and able to?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hi, Nilou. It's Joysha. So yeah, my question is just in, recognizing that shared leadership is going to be different from the scale that you're talking. So three-person organization is going to have different shared leadership than 30. So despite that, are there any like common principles or things to keep in mind just that you've seen regardless of the scale of the team?
Mm, thank you for that question too, Joysha, and good to see you. Um, okay, so let me start with those. The first one, and I think that um, yeah, the first one on how culture and indigenous wisdom is connected to these collectivist models. So one of the things that I want to acknowledge is that collectivist practices and wisdom is very ancient. I'm in California. Here in California, a lot of the land stewardship and like abundance in food and care that settler colonizers encountered when they first arrived and took over was on a principle of collective land stewardship and collective governance. So there's this rootedness, and there's a reference I make to the in the book about to this other book that's useful and that I appreciate, but that folks should take with a little bit of a grain of salt. It's called Reinventing Organizations. The author, a white man, claims that in these collectivist models, or what he calls teal organizations, or these colored or color labels of organizations. He says that that's so like revolutionary and cutting edge, and it's not. None of this work is, and there's so much wisdom in our ancestors here from this land and in the United States, and a lot of Black women who have modeled this. Ella Baker, Amy Brown, ancestors from the past and from civil rights struggles and beyond, that have really lifted up and lived into and shown us many ways to be collectivist and participatory in our governance and our practices. So that should not be overlooked. I hope that is honored and that we can center that in our work together. In terms of encountering, on Janelle's question, the encountering orgs that used to be hierarchical but have shifted to collective governance, and what has contributed to that. I'm thinking of a few different ways to respond to this. I would say, I'll say this, the organizations that I'm working with, that I'm personally working with now, that are shifting towards these, towards collective governance from hierarchical models, I am seeing it done. I am seeing it done well. It's happening slowly. And one thing that's contributing to it is starting with, just as a baseline, with values, points of unity. And I don't mean just values that support the purpose or the mission of the organization, but values that serve kind of like an internal constitution for the organization. It can be both, it can be applied both to the organizing work on the outside that we do as an organization and the way that we lead together. What are our points of unity that hold us together? And starting with that, every policy and every decision-making process that follows, that I'm supporting orgs with, we draw on those values and those principles, and we weave them into into the policies and the structure of the organization. So I think that's a big piece. And I'll say the to reference what Sheena Wadawan, another consultant in the field, says, is culture change requires at least 3 years, even in like the most high functioning organization. So shift, a significant culture change that comes, and structure change that comes with a hierarchical to collectively governed organization, minimum 3 years. And then the places that I've seen organizations, like the points in time that I see organizations do this shift, is when there's a leadership transition, when there is a crisis point and significant conflict in the organization, and when there's like organizing. I didn't reference this in the book for confidentiality, but there are organizations. There's one that I spoke with that was on the verge of unionizing. The staff were beginning to consider that path, and instead they decided to move into a cooperative structure and become a worker co-op. And that worked, and that has worked out well for them. It was the better alternative. On Joyce's question on the different how leadership is different in different sizes and scales, but common principles. I would say similar to what I just said, like the starting point being a common principle, starting point being at points of unity, creating some values. That's a great initial principle. And then, I referenced the appendices of the book. There are over 50 pages. I think there are tools and resources that can be adapted and, modified for an organization of any size and scale. When there are only 3 staff, that there's I would say there's one principle to take on early on that will make life so much smoother and easier and better in the long run, is when we're founders or leaders in an organization, in a small team, so much lives in our heads. All of these practices and policies and ideas live in our heads, and institutional knowledge lives in our heads. If you can, as a small team, or at any point before you transition, if you can start documenting and developing some guides and materials for your future folks, that that can be a great principle and practice to begin with.
Thank you, Nilou. Such good questions. And I think we have time for one more if there's someone out there with a burning question. And while you're composing yourself, I wanted to invite you, Nilou, to share if you have any other recommendations of either other worker self-directed nonprofits that people can look to learn more about, or other resources if people are wanting to continue on their journey of, seeing examples and learning from others. Where might you direct folks?
Yeah, thank you for sending me this question earlier, because I started a list, but it's so long, and there's so many more. I know I forgot some orgs, but I'll drop a list in the chat. Number one, everyone who's here, you already have one of the best resources there is out there. The Sustainable Economies Law Center. You all were, Selk was one in my own journey. Selk was like the number one partner that organization that we turned to and looked and wanted to model and learn from as we were developing our structures and systems. Pangea is another one, and here's a list of some of my favorite groups out there that I've known. Some that I've known for a long time, some that are more recent that I've gotten to know through the Nonprofit Democracies Network. I'm also adding a link to one is Rad Ops. I have a link to Rad Ops. They have a Substack with a bunch of resources. If you're in HR, there's also a Rad Ops private Facebook group. You can contact them and get on it. Those are some orgs that these are some organizations that I love and that I think folks can learn from.
Amazing. Thank you for that rich list. And it's good to see folks leading by example. Great. We do have one more question. I want to bring Jeanette in if you're up for asking your question, and then we'll just share some closing opportunities to stay connected and get involved. Jeanette, are you here and open to coming off mute and sharing your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to ask about organizations maybe that you have seen try to transition or were successful for a period of time, who maybe ended up deciding it didn't work for them. Like if you felt that there was some kind of common thread around why maybe it didn't work out, if we could try to look into the future and think about what to prioritize to avoid this common potential pitfall, I guess.
Thank you for this juicy question. Yes, this is something that does happen. And I see it, I hear it also from funders or from, organizations, people, leaders who are like, yeah, we tried that, it didn't work. So we're going to throw it out. My two things. One, I think there are ways to be collectivist and really intentional and caring in any kind of structure. I have seen and worked with organizations that have single executive director models and somewhat conventional structures, leadership structures, and they build in a lot of care, they build in a lot of processes and systems that allow for voices to be heard and participate. So I wouldn't categorize anyone or label any one group as as like a binary. I think there's a lot of fluidity in any kind of structure of an organization. And then second, what's the number one thing that leads to, an organization falling apart in a collective? conflict number one. You know, we don't know how to talk to each other. It's not modeled for us, you know. Our everything we see is it is really are bad examples of like how we should communicate. So what I do see that works in a lot of collectively led organizations and broker cooperatives, groups have, and Nicole, I think, referenced this in the past to me as well. Like a lot of groups have feedback, give and receive feedback training. We get feedback training to learn how to give and receive feedback well. And we do that when, when conflict or like a rub is small. And we do that frequently. It becomes like a culture and it becomes a routine. It becomes something that's very routine in collectively led organizations. And that kind of like fluid communication, it has like two really important impacts. And activist movement leader Mia Mingus says this well. Feedback prevents death by 1,000 little cuts, like bleeding out, because you tend to each one when it's small. And two, it prepares you for when a larger conflict comes, and it inevitably does. Every organization. I've yet to meet an organization like who has not had conflict in their organization or workplace. It prepares us, having had the practice to give feedback well, effectively, in a liberatory way, not in the like the ugly ways that we've experienced in the past. But in a really liberatory way that makes it a gift. When we have that practice, we can engage with larger conflict well as well. And that can hold us together. And I think that's the number one baseline or pitfall to avoid.
Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom. And that's a perfect cue up for us, because our next event with the Nonprofit Democracy Network is actually going to be a workshop on creating a culture of healthy feedback in your organization. So exactly what Nilou is speaking to, how can we build the skills, but also the organizational practices of regular, consistent feedback. So my colleagues will drop a link in the chat for that event in February. If you're interested, you can register. Please, 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 if you have not yet, buy Nilou's book, request it at your local bookstore, check it out from the library, share it with friends. We'll drop a link again for how you can find the book in the chat. And if you're not already, we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, the Law Center's newsletter, to hear about more upcoming events around creating liberatory organizations. There's also a link here in the chat for the Nonprofit Democracy Network. That's our community of practice for organizations doing shared leadership. We host many events like this, and peer coaching and learning spaces and practicums, and lots of ways to support you on your growth toward building a liberatory organization. And lastly, with the Nonprofit Democracy Network, we run a 12-module learning journey. That's all of the sort of structures and practices that are supportive for building worker self-directed organizations. Nilou has been a coach and advisor for that training program for the last 2 years that we've run it, and has shared a lot of her wisdom there. And we've recently packaged it into a self-paced journey, so you can actually access all of the modules and watch them on your own time. There'll be opportunity for peer coaching and sharing. So there's a link if you're interested in learning more and joining that journey in the chat. And Nilou, are you up for sharing any contact information, or if people want to reach you, how can they find you on social media or your website if people want to connect and continue to learn from you? What's the best way to reach you?
Oh, yes, they can connect with it. You can connect LinkedIn, and here's my email. I'm going to drop it in the chat. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nilou, for being here with us. Thank you for all your work. Thank you for crystallizing it into this beautiful book. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this conversation, for your wonderful questions. and hope to continue to see you in the work.
Thank you. Ditto. Appreciate you.